Greetings! Today we'll look at Chapter 11 of Watchmen, titled Look on My Work, See Mighty. I'm going to go over some symbols, motifs, imagery, themes, and interesting things that you might have missed on a first read. First, let's look at the title. More than just a title, this is a fraction of a sonnet simply called Ozymandias by a 19th century poet, Percy Shelley. It's a short but enchanting poem. Here's an excerpt. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings, look on my work, see mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. The referenced King of Kings called Ozymandias is who this chapter is all about, though he is more widely known in the current era as Ramses, specifically Ramses II. He was the third pharaoh of the 19th dynasty of Egypt, and he is often regarded as the greatest, most celebrated, and most powerful pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Yet the poem speaks to the impermanence of power. We'll talk more about that later. But first, a quick summary. Night Owl and Rorschach suspect Veidt of constructing the conspiracy and having the comedian killed, and so make their way to his hideout. Veidt, having already pushed the big red button to start his plan, hangs out with his servants and tells them about his life, how much he loves Alexander the Great, and how he tried to follow in his footsteps by going on some crazy vision quest. We also see people gather on a street corner where Bernard has been selling newspapers, all of them resolving conflicts that have been building throughout the whole novel. Veidt buries his servants in snow and destroys his vivarium just as Rorschach and Night Owl arrive. He confirms their suspicions and dispatches of them, and the chapter ends with the summoning of the great death squid and the vaporization of half of New York. Alright, let's talk about symbols and imagery. Let's hit some big ones first and then go to some smaller ones. Here's a big one, knots, and specifically a Gordian knot. The Gordian knot is a legend associated with Alexander the Great, who Ozymandias definitely idolizes. It is often used as a metaphor for an intractable problem, such as untying an impossibly tangled knot, or achieving world peace. Solved easily by finding an approach to the problem that renders the perceived constraints of the problem moot, cutting the Gordian knot, or giant death squids. It's not hard to make a connection between this legend and what Ozymandias is trying to do. World peace is a pretty tricky thing to achieve, so he's going at it from a different angle. We see a painting of the Gordian knot, Alexander the Great having just cut through it above the doorway, leading to the room that has the button that teleports the squid monster into New York. It's fitting. This isn't the only knot we see in the chapter, though. When we cut to the corner with the street vendor, we see Eileen and Joey. Eileen wants to end their relationship, and in doing so, she gives Joey a book titled Knots. Also, Eileen's hair just so happens to be tied up in a top knot. Back to the Gordian knot, the legend is commonly associated with Alexander the Great, who is credited with cutting the Gordian knot. Alexander the Great also appears a lot in this chapter, mostly referenced to by Veidt. Veidt is pretty much obsessed with this guy. He sees himself as an incarnation of him. Veidt talks about completing the 2,000-year-old dream. What he's talking about is, again, Alexander the Great, who allegedly said that he had a dream to unite the entire world through conquest. Not only is Veidt trying to continue Alexander's ideas, he loves this dude so much that he essentially went on a spirit quest, retracing Alexander's steps in an effort to prove to himself that he was just as good, if not better, than his idol. This journey culminates in Veidt taking some hashish, which gives him a weird trippy vision and inspires him to no end. Interestingly, if we look at these panels, we see that while Veidt talks about his journey, he is shown in darkness, silhouette. But when he has this vision and quote-unquote surpasses Alexander, he is shown in light, almost like he's enlightened. Though in the next few panels showing present day, he's once again shown in shadow, almost like he was sent on a path of good and light when he was inspired to become a hero, but has now strayed back into darkness. This idea of contrast, black and white, can be seen elsewhere in the chapter as well. The harsh snow outside contrasts Veidt's vivarium, which is lush and warm. And when he destroys the barrier between the cold outside and the warm interior, it shows the snow among the plants, the two opposites intermingling and creating something altogether different. Just like Veidt's plan, he is achieving great peace, but in doing so must create much death and destruction. Good and evil are mixing, and Ozymandias is in the middle of it, riding the line between what's right and what's wrong. Speaking of Veidt's plan, it hinges on the assumption that in the face of great danger, humanity will band together and unify. The question of will this work looms in the reader's minds as we learn more about the details of this scheme. If you look closely, though, you can see this question answered before the plan even happened. Going back to the street corner, all these couples are drawn to this location where the giant squid is about to be teleported, and all these couples are having disagreements. Eileen and Joey, Rorschach's therapist and his wife, as well as the two Bernards that have been at odds throughout the whole story, are all arguing. But we see Eileen and Joey make up somewhat, Rorschach's therapist feels the urge to do good, and the two Bernards come together over the common name. At the beginning, in peace times, we see how much of kind of a jerk the street vendor was, but as peace evaporates and we head towards war, it brings out the best in this guy. In fact, all the disagreements start to resolve, and we start to see the best in all of these people, demonstrating that even looming war and conflict is actually bringing people together, and that Ozymandias' plan might work. Thick, though, is the irony that all these people are restoring peace and order in their own little way in this area where Veidt is about to create so much destruction. Alright, the last big one is all the Greek and Roman imagery. This is all over the place. All over Veidt's lair we see this imagery. He even seems to have a whole room filled with ancient artifacts, helmets, breastplates, and even a chariot. All of these things and this imagery surrounding Veidt connect him to ancient rulers of the past who were godlike in their position, just how Veidt is godlike in this new world he's creating. Also, it connects him to his idol, good old Alexander the Great. Alright, now, before we move on to talking about overall themes, there are a few cool things to point out. The first is that at the very end of the chapter, when the two Bernards are being vaporized, the shape they create looks a lot like the blood splat on the smiley face at the beginning. So does the smudge on the glass of the vivarium at the very beginning of the chapter. Next is that all the screens Veidt looks at before he records his predictions for the future, they all look like a scrying mirror. A scrying mirror is a powerful divinatory tool, revered for centuries for its ability to penetrate the veil between worlds. Mirror gazing or scrying is an ancient art for making a contact with the dead, opening gates to the angelic realm, seeing into the future and the past, and seeing distant locations. All kinds of shiny surfaces have been used as tools for this, but the black mirror stands above them all. Here, Veidt is looking at all these screens and discerning patterns and perceiving and understanding events that he definitely has not borne witness to. Not to mention that when all of these screens are turned off, they turn into black mirrors. Finally, I promised I would get back to the poem, so here we go. The poem describes Ozymandias proclaiming all the good that he has done on a stone tablet sticking out of the ground. But as the speaker looks around, all they see is desolation. The fact that Ozymandias, or Veidt, takes this name shows how no matter what he does or how successful his plan is, he knows that eventually everything will mean nothing. Any peace he may foster will erode with time. Now, on to themes. First, let's talk about the main theme here, which is moralist versus utilitarian ethics. Rorschach holds a strict view of morality and condemns any breach of any law in any form. Veidt takes a utilitarian approach, disregarding small breaches of law if they serve a greater good, and in the case of his plan, sacrificing many lives to save many more. The two heroes' opposite views of ethics inevitably draw them into conflict with each other, pitting one system against each other. We see this conflict all over the novel, not just in this chapter. Rorschach and Veidt's ethical conflict compares strict moralism with utilitarianism, ultimately suggesting that utilitarianism is more effective, though neither system is necessarily more morally right than the other. Other themes are those of power, what it means to be a god. Obviously, Dr. Manhattan is basically a god, but Veidt influences so many things that someone might see him as one. Is he a god? The Eye of Ra on his collar certainly shows he thinks of himself as one. We also see themes of growth and redemption. There's Veidt's whole spirit quest thing, as well as all the couples who make up and grow as people shortly before they all get incinerated. Lastly, I need to mention that our comic within a comic ends during this chapter, and it ends in tragedy, the sailor fully succumbing to rage and accidentally killing his wife, showing the ineffectiveness of revenge. In summary, this chapter is about Veidt, Ozymandias, what made him who he is, why he acts the way he does, and if his moral ideas are truly the most effective ones.